My name is Simone Ledeen. I'm a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense and currently a senior fellow at the Center for Tech Diplomacy at Purdue. Our distinguished panel today is, we've had a last minute switcheroo, so sorry. We've got, if you can raise your hands when I name you, Brian Smith, Cyber Criminal Section Chief at the FBI, Jeanette McMillan, Deputy Assistant Director for Supply Chain at NCSC and ODNI, Michael Lowry, Executive Practice Engineer for QBE supporting Army ECMA, and Kevin McTarsney, CTO for MFGS Inc. Okay, so for the next half hour, we're going to be discussing 2021 lessons learned defending national security. And I think to kick it off, what are the biggest trends from 2021? Let's start, Kevin, let's start with you.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. I think one of the biggest ones, and we can't get it out of the room without talking about the pandemic, so we might as well. Work from home, I think, is probably one of the biggest trends impacting some of the things that are going on right now. Work from home created a extended attack surface for the attacker. I mean, sure, we had phishing before, but now we're phishing people at home. We have BYOD devices that some people are using to connect. We don't know what they do with them in between work and non-work activities. So it has really opened up for our security professionals a difficult situation of being able to continue to work while also protecting the network, protecting the systems, the applications, the data.
Jeanette, oh, hello. Jeanette, is that your experience as well? Sorry, this is a little awkward setup, but is that your experience as well? What did you see last year?
Absolutely, Simone. Jeanette McMillan, NCSC. From the National Counterintelligence and Security Center, we also saw that our adversary is very good. Our adversary is diverse and 100% persistent. So when you spread the attack surface the way that Kevin has described, everybody working from home, everyone trying to do as much as they possibly can in the environment to maintain productivity, to maintain connection, all of those things absolutely multiply. And in terms of the supply chains, as we all saw through the pandemic, who would have thought that one particular boat in one canal would have caused so much disruption within the supply chain shocks? But when you're not prepared for the resiliency that one needs to make sure that you can get through those supply chain shocks, that's also something that was a big lesson learned for us. And so one of the things that we're trying to do right now, especially this month, I don't know if you know, but April is indeed Supply Chain Integrity Month. So we have been pushing out awareness because the one thing we've learned last year is that to educate, you got to mitigate to educate. So that's definitely something that we've been focused on this month and throughout.
Great. Brian, from the FBI's perspective, what were the biggest lessons learned last year?
Yeah, so if you saw me backstage there, my heart started palpitating when they gave me the mic and I had to walk up here and wire myself very quickly. So, I've been out of the field for a little bit, and so we're very used to that. And then to come out and have the wire hanging down, I was a little embarrassed. So I assure you that your FBI does operate better than that when we are doing that sort of activity. So lessons learned, I think to me it's that back office has become front and center. And when you think about the cyber threat, I think a lot of folks have been thinking about, okay, what's my core business? What are the core competencies of what I do as an entity or as a governmental agency? And so we're trying to protect against those things. But I think what we've learned over this last year is that all of those other things that happen that help us function and do our job and enable us to do our business, those are just as important. And that if those get interfered with, if those get stopped, and whether it's a cyber attack or it's supply chain via natural economic situation, that is really important. And the adversary has taken note of that. And so where we're sitting there thinking, hey, I got to protect the crown jewels for the entity, They're looking at how do I put them in a position, particularly in ransomware, where I can hold them hostage and they're going to do what I need them to do. And so if that means I'm going to take out your accounts payable department and you can't bill people and can't collect people from people, that's just as good as me shutting down your production system. So that to me is the biggest change. And I think that there's some lessons that we can take of, hey, understanding we got to be looking across our organizations to protect each of those areas because each of them are important to our overall sustainability.
Great. Michael, over at the Army, at DoD, was there anything sort of unique that you noted? I mean, have you seen similar trends in your work?
Yeah, so the critical infrastructure of multiple nation states has been a lot more exposed and vulnerable during the pandemic. Either people being at home or having more time has definitely caused an uptick in the number of attacks that are targeted on the work from home concept as well as the BYOD vulnerabilities. There's two good examples that are on the borderline of 2021 at the beginning, at the end, that are good case studies or corollaries to look to for the impact of disruption of critical infrastructure. On the leading end, there is the pipeline disruption. What happens when you interrupt the supply delivery of a national pipeline by just messing up some scheduling on the pipes? What happens when gas or other critical elements are deprived from an organization, nation, or community that needs them? And on the following hand, we see a much more significant impact on that in late 21, early 22 with the current activities in Ukraine and the war over there. For the last year, we've been watching with some cybersecurity teams that are on the ground from AIT in DoD that's been working in conjunction with Ukraine on just how important and impactful can disrupting the power grid be. Can messing with local transit and mass transit functions and scheduling, how does that impact a country and disrupt their economy, their capability to defend themselves? When we look back at the United States, a lot of people have the feeling that they're protected by the DoD, that there's somebody watching the internet for attacks. Within the DoD, we have the castle wall doctrine, where we set up our castle wall to defend the Department of Defense and the various services and systems within it. But outside of that, critical infrastructures, towns, cities, corporations, you're more or less directly exposed open on the internet. So what would happen if the same thing that happened in Ukraine happened to, say, Houston, and the power grid went down, or 1/3 of the country? Those type of impact assessments are things that that really need to be focused on, and there's been a large uptick, even in the US, of direct attacks on that in the last year, specifically.
Thank you very much. I think that's a really broad summary of lessons learned from many different perspectives, and I think very helpful. When we sort of consider those lessons learned, I think it'd be useful to talk a little bit about the successes that we saw in the last year, successes in dealing with this. I know that there's always a lot of focus on the negatives, and I think we're all very well aware of what those are, some of which were mentioned by our panelists already. But what were some notable successes that you saw that you can talk about, and things that we should consider emulating this year and out into the future? Jeanette, let's start with you.
Sure, thank you. I think one of the things that we've all seen in terms of a success is the increase in information sharing. You cannot get enough when it comes to information sharing, especially between government and private sector and government and private sector amongst itself. And as a recovering attorney from the CIA, I do not have a PhD in information sharing, so I understand that there are definitely some cultural issues that folks need to get over when it comes to that sharing. But as we've seen just in recent weeks through different elements in terms of critical infrastructure owner operators being brought in, being told exactly, providing classified briefings. That's something that we also do from time to time, depending upon different sectors within NCSC. We will definitely make sure that we're taking that extra step to ensure that that particular critical sector understands the threats that we're actually seeing on the inside. So just in recent weeks, we've been able to get that information out, make sure that those particular sectors understand, but even more importantly, through our partnerships with the CISA over at DHS, as well as their new creation, JCDC, there's another opportunity to share that information. And especially when we've got over 80% of critical infrastructure being owned by the private sector, that's definitely something that we need to make sure we're doing a better job of in terms of that information sharing piece. So I would say that by far has been, I've seen an uptick in that, and that definitely something we count as success and something to continue in the coming year.
That's great. I know, when we talk about the IC, information sharing isn't normally the #1 topic that comes to mind.
Well, I know it's
So,
not.
as a recovering IC member myself, I feel like I can make that joke.
We've got a 12-step program. It's okay. It's okay. We're going to get through this.
But no, that's fantastic. Thank you. Brian, I know FBI has stepped up a lot in a lot of areas. What successes have you seen that you would like to see kind of practiced more broadly?
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked the question, because I think, like many of you, we are always focused at what the problem is. And sometimes it's good to step back, not only see the stuff that you're doing, but also what can you learn from those things. And I think the two things that stick out to me over this past year, one is the increased information sharing. And I see that on two different parallel lines. One is within the government, the IC community, and then between governments and between countries, friendly countries. And so that's been a really positive development, that we've seen an appetite there that we didn't see before. And then the second is with the private sector. And there's still a lot of work to be done within that arena. But it's so critical to our success. And, I have to tell you, for being in this space for, at least 10 years, and people talking about public-private partnerships and things like that, sometimes it makes me want to throw up, because it means nothing if you aren't actually doing something about it. And so there were buzzwords that people were using. I really think over this last probably year and a half, I have actually seen an appetite of the private sector wanting to share with the government and see, how do we better understand what this threat looks like, and the government willing to tip their hand a little bit more than we have in the past. And I think that makes us all safer. And so that's one area. The other area that I think we've seen success is how we've gone after the threat and using a whole of government approach to it. And I think a really good example is, and it's funny because there was a takedown recently of RAID forums, and yesterday it was like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I couldn't remember what it was because things just move so fast. But over the summer, with the work that we did leading a kind of intergovernmental agency coalition against Pseudo-Nikibi and Rebel, and the work that went into that, and to really try and address it in a holistic and comprehensive fashion. You saw indictments in that case, you saw arrests in that case, you saw arrests overseas, you saw financial actions taken against the adversaries of seizures of $6 million and $2 million against individuals. You saw OFAC sanctions against the adversaries, individuals, as well as exchanges that facilitated the activity. And what it shows is that we are taking a comprehensive approach to this and recognizing from the Bureau standpoint that while we are good, we are not good enough, and we are not the only ones that have talented people and unique capabilities. And if we're going to get this job done, we've got to be partnering with other agencies who have complementary skill sets and bringing those together. And so it's not a matter of us competing for these things, it's let's work together to get the result that we want. And we are not going for haymakers on this, but these are body blows that we are trying to deliver to the adversary day in, day out. And I think you will see over time here that is having an impact, because I know I've seen it in my work.
A quick follow-up to that, because you mentioned the private sector, and I know a lot of us are interested in that. There has been historically a resistance to information sharing by certain companies, certain firms, because publicity surrounding certain events might affect their bottom line, or their reputational risk appetite is very low. How do you look at that? How do you think about that?
Yeah, when I think the recent activity in Ukraine is a good example of, you've seen American companies make some really hard decisions about what they're going to do and not do in other locations. And I think having them look at it from the perspective, what does this look like to the outside? And do you want to be part of the solution on this? And so when we have a press release like we did in Sudnikibi and Revel, and we're talking about the companies that supported our activities in that arena, I think that's a pretty good news story. And I think it helps those companies say, hey, we are part of the solution in this. And the companies that are not on those, and there's some big companies that you would think have a role to play in those, they're not in that space. And I think, I'm Irish Catholic, so shame and guilt are really powerful tools. And I think that's a way to use that of like, hey, you see, the Microsofts of the world really stepping up into this space, and where are the other players in it?
That's great to hear. I happen to agree with you, and I think also.
On the Irish Catholic guilt thing?
I'm not Irish nor Catholic, but I do agree. I don't know, but don't tell my rabbi. But I also though I think that also lifting up like a kind of a public support for companies that are doing the right thing, I think also helps helps them get over this hurdle of. We have to keep everything quiet because God forbid it gets out that we had an intrusion or we had a problem. Okay, thank you very much for that. Kevin, what are your thoughts on examples, sort of positive things that have come out of 2021, successes that we can think about emulating in the future?
I think workforce development is one thing that's getting a lot of attention because there is such a shortage in the space, and it is not an easy career to just jump into. A lot of folks grew into it. People with gray beards and 30 years of background do this type of thing. It's hard to take somebody and just flip them over and make them a cybersecurity professional, but there's a significant effort to try and shorten that time span it takes to make somebody productive in that space. And we see it at all levels. We see it at the high school level. We're seeing it in the junior high school level. I think there's a national focus now on this, which is really important. We have all our industry groups like AFCEA, who have their STEM program and are putting out scholarships. And then at the local community college level, they have free classes. They have free classes that lead to degrees after a certain amount of time, and then into obviously our universities that are providing that in partnership with the government. So through either GSA or NSA, they have their centers of excellence. Without that workforce development, without people, we're always going to need people to do this at some point within the process.
Very, very true. And that's one of the things I'm really pleased that Purdue is focused on too, is adding more seats to their classes in these areas. Michael, last but certainly not least, talk a little bit about this, about successes and kind of what we can look to improve on in the coming years.
Absolutely. Building on what we've been talking about on education and the uptick in understanding of cyber, I've seen a lot across both the public, private, and the DoD sectors on the understanding of the multiple threat vectors and the actual motivations behind attacks. The pervasiveness of cyber being accepted as not only degree programs but proper education is injected a larger amount of understanding of cybersecurity across disciplines. And that's led to people being better able to analyze what exactly the threat is to them and the motivation behind the threat. We've talked about a couple of examples up here so far, but There is a difference when you're being attacked by a nation-state peer, a near-peer adversary, organized crime, script kiddies in their parents' basement, you name it. They have different motivations. Are they after money, or thus pursuing a ransomware? Are they for defacement or for a political activism aspect? Or are they a nation-state rival after a disruption capability or damage capability? Those are all defended in different ways in different parts of the organizations with different tools. And knowing what's coming at you is key to doing that. And in order to know that, you have to understand the impact. So having, say, resourcing and finance experts who traditionally didn't necessarily understand cybersecurity because it wasn't in their skill set, now having a larger understanding allows us to better integrate cybersecurity into a wide variety of our operational functions, from logistics to production and everywhere else in the various systems. And that holds true for private companies as well as the government.
If I can jump in on that, I think that's probably the truest statement that you've heard up here, is the fact that we've got to look at this from the functional side of what the adversary is trying to do. And too often we've looked at it as a technical problem. And if you start bringing people in who understand, well, wait a minute, when that gets in my network, here's what they could do to us, that's when you actually can start defending this, because you understand what they're after. And that is a game changer, I think, for all of us and for folks in the private sector. That you start doing that, you actually can have an impact on this thing.
Final thoughts as we wrap up here, Jeanette?
Well, first of all, I think one of the best things to do is to have forums like this, where we are able to talk about these discussions and to really understand exactly where everyone sits, because we're all at different positions and we're all at different things and we have different perspectives. So being able to have forums like this, especially in person again, is just really, really fantastic. But I also think that, again, keeping that dialogue going, but making sure that we are focused on those strategic goals that we've outlined today.
Kevin, bring us home.
Country roads,
Take it home.
Absolutely.
John Denver.
Getting the band back together.
Yeah, I mean, back to the sharing of information, I think that's going to continue to be key. But right now we have, I believe, an opportunity to really look at, if you defend against something and you build a TTP around it, tactic, technique, procedure, now that becomes your secret sauce, potentially. And it's protecting what's inside your organization. And, why would you let that out? Because it could help everybody. So there's a very interesting dilemma to figure out, how do we break that down to a consumable amount of information that doesn't give away intellectual property or the secret sauce, but gets to helping other organizations to defend, because it's just, from a national security perspective, that's key. We have to be working together.
Great. Well, I hope this has been as informative for you as it has been for me. Thank you all very much for your time today. And yeah, that's all we have. Thanks.